Hi, welcome to Mama's Natural. I'm your host, Rusty Red, and this is my fourth video in my introductory series. The last two videos were about my pregnancy and labor and delivery story with our son, and this one I'm going to go over my pregnancy experience with our daughter, Gabriella. When I found out I was pregnant with Gabby, we had been trying for a couple months at that point. I knew I wanted to have more than one child, and so we were ready to kind of start trying for another baby. I wanted them to be roughly 2 years apart, but I really couldn't have planned this if I wanted to. She conceived within the same week that we conceived with our son. So these guys are 2 years and 3 days apart, which is really cool. So both my babies are within a day or two of Valentine's, which is really neat. Makes Valentine's an extra special time for me because it's also when my husband first asked me on our first date, and it's also when he proposed to me. So it's been a really special month of the year for me. So when I found out, it was not really much of a surprise. After my son had been born, my menstrual cycles that normally were very unpredictable by several weeks had gone to predictable to the day. And so out of the blue, all of a sudden I'm several days late, and I'm like, I kind of bet that I'm pregnant. And my husband, somehow he is able to track that off his head. I don't know how, but he always seems to know when I'm supposed to be starting my period. So craziest thing. So he's like, aren't you supposed to have been starting like a few days ago? And I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? I was supposed to. And sure enough, we took tests. I was pregnant. We were really excited. I didn't do an announcement obviously for him because he was already suspicious of it, but we did the same exact announcement that we did with our son, which was coincided with Father's Day. So we had a grandpa and grandma card that we handed out to the grandparents to announce that baby was on the way. And this pregnancy was a night and day difference from my son's. I had the worst case of morning sickness imaginable, and I tried everything that was not overly toxic to try to alleviate the morning sickness. But I pretty much spent weeks in the bathroom most of the time. My husband was still working at Firekeepers at the time, so he was working night shift, so he was able to be there during the day. Poor guy would go to work all night, and then come home and only have a few hours to sleep before he'd have to take over for me when I would wake up in the morning to take over the children, so I could just hover in the bathrooms. I mean, I never actually threw up, but I was so on the verge. It was almost wanting to come up into my mouth all day, every day. And so my mother and mother-in-law had to come and help out and take turns as well, because I couldn't do much more than breastfeed, and even then I was breastfeeding in front of the toilet, leaned over the toilet. It was rough. It was so awful. So, by the way, my mom actually lives the next property over, so it was easy to have her come and be of support for that, which was really helpful. And then my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, lives about 30 minutes north of us. So, I had their support. It was really great. Otherwise, I don't know how we would have survived. And it wasn't until 14 weeks pregnant that the morning sickness finally went away. I didn't really have any cravings at all, and no real food aversions. Just during the morning sickness, I just couldn't eat hardly anything. I could barely drink water. I made sure I got it down, but because I was still breastfeeding at that time. But anyway, so it was pretty rough. And then about 15 weeks, my husband had joined the military, and so the Army National Guard branch. So it was going to be able to keep him closer to home, but he still had to go to boot camp. And so he left at around 15 weeks, I believe, yeah. And was going to be gone for 6 months. Between boot camp, which is 10 weeks, and then AIT training can take a varying length of time. It was going to end up being about 6 month long venture. He would be able to come home for Christmas, but that was going to be it. So here I am, pregnant, sicker than a dog, and my husband, driving my husband to the hospital, waving him off with a toddler that is in absolute hysterics, because apparently he understood more than we realized. He was 18 months old at that time, and he understood. So I was doing pretty good, I thought, at just not thinking about it. And so we took my husband, and I kind of was trying to be excited about it, and I thought I was doing pretty good. And my husband was doing pretty good about not being worried about it or emotional about it. It's like, okay, let's just take this a day at a time. You're going to get going, and then I'll let it sink in later. But somehow our son just he knew something was up. So that was a tough time for me to be dealing with him while I was a little bit sick still. with morning sickness and dealing with him. And I was not really able to let myself mourn my husband leaving because I needed to be there for my son. And so long story short with that, at my husband's graduation from boot camp, I got on a plane with our son and my mother and father-in-law and flew down to his graduation. It actually went really smooth, aside from missing some flights because the flights just not timing themselves really well. Our son did amazing on the plane. I was really tired, obviously, because having to deal with him and being pregnant and the exhaustion that comes with that. But he did amazing. Because he wasn't breastfeeding, I did manage to pull off getting him to sip out of a cup when I would tell him to. And so that worked out with helping with his ears a lot. Anytime his ears would start to feel funny, I told him, when your ears start to feel funny, you need to tell mommy. And he was very linguistically advanced, so he could express a lot of his feelings and thoughts limitedly, but fairly well. And so anytime his ears would hurt, he'd be like, "Mommy, my ears. And so I would give him a sip of his water, and a few sips, and that would help that. So, and it was really great. We kept him occupied looking out the window, watching the guys direct the plane and drive the baggage cars around. So it worked out really well. We were down there for about 3 days and then came home, and it wasn't until Christmas that my husband was able to come back home again. And as nice as it was having him come home, I think it complicated things with our son a little bit more as well, because it was daddy's gone, now daddy's back, and then daddy's gone again. So, but it was still good because I got to see him at Christmas, and I didn't feel like he was missing out on the entire pregnancy. But after Christmas break was over, he had to obviously go back. And the rest of the pregnancy really was fairly uneventful. We did, though, decide to do a home birth for this one. So I was working with a home birth midwife that was local to the area, and she works with a lot of the Amish in our area. So I knew she would be fairly hands-off and just kind of let you do your thing and just be there for support. So I'll get into a little bit of that with the next video with my pregnancy story. So when I actually went into labor, my husband was not home yet. But she actually was born right on her due date, which was really neat. So that's going to wrap this video up, and I will share with you my delivery story in the next video. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, and in the comments below, let me know what your second pregnancy was like. How did it compare to your first pregnancy? Was it drastically different, or was it very the same? And what were the genders of those two babies? See you in the next video.